Is Julie Sullivan. I do the mentor training and support for the new agrarian program at the Quivira Coalition. We refer to the program as NAP. So during this call, if you hear me talking about that, it doesn't mean sleep. It means the program that we run here. This call is actually on expectations. And one of the reasons we like to do this call at this point in the season is that at least in our program, our mentors have been in interviews now for a period of time. Some people have made their job offers and have had those offers accepted. Other people are in the process of making a final decision about who to hire. And part of that process of hiring the right person is about figuring out what are our expectations as an employer and as a mentor, and what are the expectations that the apprentice, intern, or employee has for us. And a lot of times, some of those expectations are very clear to us. It's really easy to articulate them. And more than likely, we have some expectations that we don't even know we have. Therefore, we haven't communicated them clearly. And often those are the things that trip us up and cause frustration and miscommunication later in the season. So that's kind of what we'll drill into a little bit today. Um, Before I start sharing slides, I do want to share one brief story, which is one of the reasons why this topic is so near and dear to me. Back before we started the new agrarian program, George and I, my husband, we took interns here at our ranch, and we had phone interviewed a young man who was actually in Ireland at the time. He was an American citizen living in Ireland. And we got through the interview. We thought we'd covered everything that was critically important. We hired him, and he relocated from Ireland to come to our ranch and work with us for about 6 months. Within about a day, we knew we had probably made a mistake. And the mistake we'd made was because he was a chain smoker. We're a non-smoking operation. Our housing is non-smoking. Our vehicles are non-smoking. I have some respiratory issues, and I'm sensitive to cigarette smoke. And we also were running cattle at the time on a national wildlife refuge, which had a serious no smoking ban due to fire danger. So literally, this person wasn't going to be able to smoke very regularly during the workday. And he was someone who really couldn't go 20 minutes without a cigarette. He would start having all of these weird sort of anxiety manifestations. It was our fault. We hadn't said we were a no smoking operation. It had never occurred to us to bring that up because we'd never had an apprentice or an intern who was a smoker, and we aren't smokers. So that's what I mean about you may have an expectation or a policy, and it hasn't even occurred to you that that's something to talk about because it hasn't come up before. So those are some of the things we're going to drill into. We ended up having to let him go. We felt terrible about it. So this call is about never having that happen to you, to go all the way through an interview process, a hiring process, have somebody show up and realize that because of a neglect around communicating information and being really clear about what they're looking for, and is that what you're offering? That's going to really save you a lot of heartache. So with that, let me go ahead and try to screen share, which is always exciting for me. It never doesn't, I'm always a little confused. Oh, see it, this is what it does to me. Hang on. Let me go back to, all right. Let me try this again. There we go. Can you all see that?
Yep.
Great. All right. So some expectations we know we have. These are the things that we've probably very clearly communicated, or we think we have clearly communicated in the course of interviewing. Showing up on time, taking care of tools, no drinking or drugs during the workday. Ask questions if you don't understand something rather than break it. Tell me you don't know how to use it, and be honest about what you do and don't know. So we have probably clearly communicated these things either in our job description, during our interview process, and certainly before we make the final hire. These are things we've probably assumed are understood. There are some subtleties here, though, that we may not be aware of. Showing up on time, I think, is a really good one to talk about. If your workday starts at 7:30, does that mean that the person arrives at 7:30, or does that mean that they're ready to work at 7:30? If they show up at 7:30, they may have to use the bathroom, they may want to get a cup of coffee, you might need to have a 10-minute conversation about the work duties, they might need to spend 10 or 15 minutes gathering tools in order to get out the door for their job. So what is your start time? And does start time mean you are ready to head out on the job doing the task? Or does that start time include 15 minutes of check-in time, getting tools, using the bathroom? So be clear about what you mean. This is something that I know I have never been completely clear about. I think I have been, but I haven't been. And this is something that's really important if you have a large team. On a lot of our ranches, we may only have one person or two people who work there, and so we can be a little more flexible. But if you have a larger team, or if you're working with someone who hasn't had a lot of work experience yet, they may not know what you mean by showing up on time. So be clear with yourself and then be clear with them about what that is. Taking care of tools, this is another pet peeve I think that mentors often have. Make sure they know where tools go at the end of the day. Do they go back in the vehicle? Do they go back in the tool shed? Is there some sort of general maintenance or loving care that you need to do with the tool? A lot of times we will assume that people know what we mean when we say put them away. Like for us, if we don't have 15 fence stretchers, we have 2. So does the fence stretcher stay in the vehicle that somebody used that day? But then if that vehicle gets driven off-site the next morning and someone else needs the fence stretcher. So putting away the fence stretcher, does that mean it goes back in the tool shed? Does it mean it stays in the vehicle it was used? Does it go into the ranch office so that it's available for whoever needs it the next day? So what do you mean when you say take care of the tools and put away the tools? No drinking and drugs on the job. I think this one is pretty straightforward. Somebody either is or is not doing this, but you might clarify the fact that that also includes showing up to work not hungover. I would say that's more likely. That's certainly a situation we've dealt with. We've never had people drinking or using recreational marijuana during the workday, but we have had people enjoy themselves a little too much at night. And the truth is that when they showed up the next day, they probably weren't safe to be in a corral working livestock. Their reflexes weren't going to be good enough. So I think mentioning that as a safety issue can be a really good way to clarify why that is so important, that they're sort of mindful about showing up to work healthy and ready to work does mean not hungover. Asking questions. This is a tricky one. I think that we all think we're easy to talk to probably, or that we're easy to ask questions of. More than likely, you're fairly intimidating to your apprentice, particularly early on, and they don't want you to be second guessing your choice of hiring them. So they might actually be hesitant to ask a question, particularly if it seems like it's a stupid question to them. So a little bit later in this call, we'll talk a little bit about orientation and onboarding when your apprentice first arrives. And that can be a really great way to set a tone about, even if you're busy, even if the day has already started, if they're not clear about something, you really do want them to ask a question, and how to reinforce that so that they realize that that's not going to make them seem less capable or less skilled. In fact, you would rather that they ask than break things. And then just being honest about what they do and don't know. I have had some experiences where people slightly overstated their skills in their application. And when they finally get on the job, I realized that they really aren't quite as capable as they say they are, or at least the way they know how to do something is not the way I want it done. So part of getting oriented to your apprentice and them getting oriented to you might mean that you need to spend a little bit more time than you're planning, actually going out and working alongside them and making sure they know what you mean by a job well done. So these are the expectations that more than likely have been clearly communicated, but you might need to actually be a little bit more detailed about what you mean by these things. So then there are the expectations that we don't know we have. And a lot of these are actually about ourselves rather than about our incoming employee, apprentice, or intern. We probably have an expectation that they're going to learn things more quickly than they will. Some things they are going to learn very quickly because they have a natural aptitude for them. They really understand machinery. They really understand animals. They really understand finances. Like there are some things that they're going to have a natural inclination to do well. There are going to be other things that they're going to struggle with, and they may struggle with those for the entire period of time they're with you. This can be really frustrating for us. And I know some of you on the call have had that experience. I certainly have had that experience. Case in point, the very first NAP apprentice, a really remarkable young woman, had some livestock experience. It was mainly with goats. It wasn't a lot with cattle. We're a cattle operation. She came to us, and in the entire year she was with us, she never was able to give an injection to an animal. She was a remarkable person in many ways, and actually one of the best stock women I've ever worked with. Her capacity to tell that an animal might be in distress or ill was so clear that she could sort of know that that was an, you know how you get that second, that sense, like I need to look at that animal another time. I need to go out and check another time, and you don't really know why. She had that. It was like she was born with that skill. She now has her own operation in Vermont. She's very successful, but she never learned how to do an injection when she was with us because she was so tuned into the animal, she was worried that she was going to hurt them. So that's just a case in point of somebody who really is an incredible person and is going to be very successful in this line of work, but really struggled to learn something in a certain period of time. You may have an expectation that you're not going to have to change anything about how you run your day. More than likely, that's not true. I would say in general, the mentors in our program have discovered that they're usually going to make some adaptations. They're probably going to need to spend a little bit more time on a regular basis checking in with their apprentice about how work is going out and double checking work, maybe having to do a review. You might have taught something once or twice. They may need another a refresher on something. Like maybe every time they need to go and back up a trailer for a while or load animals, they may need to have sort of an additional lesson in that more frequently than you're expecting. So just assume that you may have to become a little bit more organized or structured in how you run your workday, depending on whether you're sort of a wake up in the morning, what needs to be done kind of person, which is what George, my husband, is like. Or if you're someone who has a lot of systems in place already, more than likely those you're going to have to figure out how to communicate those systems to your apprentice. Most of us try to be very patient, but we're dealing with tricky situations often, and it can be easy for us to lose our patience, get grumpy, get gruff. So assume that you're probably going to lose your patience more than you like or more than is effective as a mentor. And figure out, if you do lose your cool, if you do have a screaming match with somebody in the corral, how are you going to repair that? So that you're able to sort of get past that rough patch. That's going to take a little time and energy. Something that we have noticed over the years is that for a lot of the young people who come into this program, unless they have a lot of agricultural experience already, they actually sort of don't know how to use their body right. Like they don't know how to use a shovel without injuring their back. They don't know how to use their knees when they're going to pick something up. They may have hiked, they may have mountain biked, they may be cross-country skiers, they may have a lot of recreational strength, but they haven't done the kind of work you're going to be asking them to do. So you might want to just make a point when they're learning a new physically demanding task of giving them those pointers, maybe doing it with them, watching how they use their body. That's an investment on your part. That's making sure that this person isn't going to become injured and then unable to work. So while it feels like maybe a waste of time early on, it's actually an investment in making sure that person is autonomous and capable. And then this last one, I've already mentioned this, is that you're just going to have to show it once and they'll pick it up. I think a lot of us, that if you grew up in agriculture and you've really only worked with people who grew up in agriculture, people pick things up pretty quickly because they've been doing them their whole life. This was a big learning curve for George when we started taking apprentices who didn't have a lot of ag experience. He'd spent his entire life on the ranch. He only knew people who'd grown up on ranches. And it's like he likes to say, I don't know what they don't know, so I don't know how to explain something to them. So just sort of assume that they don't know what they don't know, and you don't know what they don't know, and you're probably going to have to explain things more than once. And then just lastly, and then I'll take a pause and see if anybody has any comments or questions. What expectations do they have? During the interview process, they are often so eager to prove to you that they're the right person that they may not have really even thought about what are they looking for, because they're trying to demonstrate to you how ready they are for what you offer. These are the things that usually emerge around the time you make the offer, they accept it, and they start to really think about the transition they're going to be making. And so if you can try to find out, even before they arrive, a little bit more about these things, it's going to help you sort of prepare yourself and prepare them to get off to a good start. So range of duties, this is one where you've probably been very clear in your job description and your interviews about what are the basic duties that this person is going to be responsible for and learn about in the course of their time with you. But are some of those things potentially conditional? Let me give you a case in point. The second year of this program, of the NAP program, we hired a really wonderful young man. And the main reason he wanted to do the program and work with us was because we were trying to do a lot of really progressive management out on our BLM allotment. His career path had him thinking that he was going to be working with large public land ranching and really wanting to do sort of holistic management, regenerative practices on federal and state properties on a large scale. So he wanted to go someplace where he was going to have that opportunity. That's something we normally do. Well, we ended up in a drought that year, and we chose to take voluntary non-use in our BLM allotment, which meant that we were not going to be going out on federal land. We were not going to be working on large landscapes. We actually had to make a pretty significant pivot. He almost left because of that, because that's why he came. And all of a sudden, that opportunity was not going to be possible. He ended up staying. We pivoted. We were working on a wildlife refuge. We were able to give him a lot of responsibility there with coming up with the grazing plan. So he still got some of what he was looking for and learning how to work with federal agency people in a win-win kind of sensibility. But I mentioned that story because if there's something like that in your operation, like maybe there's a lease that you're trying to get, and if you get that lease, then the apprentice or intern might be running a herd of cattle with a little bit more autonomy on that lease. But if you don't get that lease, then they're not going to have that opportunity. If you have something like that, that's a conditional duty, make sure that you've been clear about that so they understand that, if it's drought, if a lease doesn't come through, or it may be aptitude. I think for some mentors, we don't really know exactly what we're going to have the apprentice do until they show up and we see, are they somebody who's mechanically minded? And so I can put them on my expensive tractor for haying, or is this a person that I'm never going to let near my expensive tractor? And so if there's something like that you can't guarantee they're going to do, make sure that you've communicated sort of like, these are the things you will definitely do. These are things that you may or may not do depending on the season. Just so they understand and they aren't coming thinking that they're going to spend, every day riding ponies and putting out salt, when the truth is that they may do that once every 2 weeks. How much time do you think you're going to be able to spend with them? We have some mentors in our program who are very hands-on. On a regular basis, at least weekly, they work side by side with their apprentice. They build in a lot of time to make sure that the apprentice has time to ask questions, to have a review of duties. They work together in the corral. And then we have other mentors who are a little more hands-off, who sort of train somebody in a particular set of duties and then kind of turn them loose for a couple of months until it's time to teach the next set of duties. So really reflect a little bit on what kind of a mentor are you? How much time do you think you're going to have with them? And don't overpromise. This is something that does happen. I think all of us go into this really wanting to be a good mentor and be available. And then our lives get really busy. And every year, George and I have these periods where we know we're going to be really busy and we're going to kind of drop the ball with staying in touch, good contact with our apprentice. So we try to warn them about that. That we'll spend a lot of time with them in the first 2.5 months. And then in the summer, it gets really busy. And we'll see them every day, but we probably won't be working, together because we're dealing with a lot more land at that point in time. So we're just kind of clear about that. So think about that. Make sure you haven't overpromised your time. Autonomy and decision-making. This is one, if you have hired or are trying to hire somebody who has several years of experience, they're going to want more autonomy and they're going to want to have their ideas listened to, even if you don't follow them. If somebody with a lot of experience is coming to you, it's because they're trying to move into that kind of manager mindset. And they're going to kind of probably push up against your oversight a little bit more. So you might want to think a little bit again about at what point are you as a mentor comfortable giving people more autonomy and more involvement in making decisions using their own judgment? And maybe have a little conversation with them about that, about like, what are the benchmarks that you're going to want? I would say one of the things a lot of mentors do is they'll say, I want you to learn my way first. I want to see you successfully do it the way that we already do it here. And then I'll be interested in hearing your ideas. And I will let you know at what point, I'm ready for that. So just be clear about that, so you're not feeling like you're in this kind of tug of egos on a regular basis. We're finding that that's a little bit more prevalent in the last few years, even in people with less experience. So don't be surprised if you get a little bit of pushback on your oversight. Obviously, the details of compensation are something you're going to want to have covered clearly. And make sure that you talk with them a little bit about the schedule. Like maybe there are times in the season where the workday is quite long, but that you're going to try to give them some compensatory time off when things slow down. That can really help. So I'm going to pause there for a second and just see if anybody has any comments or questions or input. Anything you do on your operations that really helps? All right, I'm going to go ahead and go on. So if you have hired your apprentice, or if you're getting ready to hire your apprentice, there are some things that in our program we do ask you to do. And this is just sort of a cheat sheet on that. So for people who are hiring apprentices in the new agrarian program, they are an employee. They are not an independent contractor. They don't meet the requirements that the IRS has for an independent contractor. So we do ask that you're going to be handling them as a W-4 employee, which means you're going to have to be setting up a payroll system if you don't already have one. so that you can do withholding tax and submit that withholding tax periodically to the government. So for some people, that's something that's not at all of a surprise. For some ranchers, they have historically not had people on payroll. And so you might have a little bit of work you need to do in order to get that set up. If that is an issue for you, you can reach out to me and I'm happy to talk you through some of the steps we went through when we needed to set people up on payroll. So a job description. At the New Agrarian Program, we do ask that our mentors create a written job description. Some people use an employee agreement or a contract. We recommend that people use a job description that's based on Farm Commons recommendations. And it's basically exactly what it sounds like. It's just a list of duties, compensation, potential learning opportunities, day off, any policies in particular that you want to have in writing, that you want to make sure that the apprentice has read. And that is a document that they sign, you date it, and then each of you have a copy. With these notes, I will send out a template, a sample job description that you can then make a copy of and fill in and adapt to your needs. It's really good to have it in writing. And again, for a lot of people in the ranching world, they have been fairly informal with these kinds of things. But we have found that it is really valuable to have it in writing. In our program, our mentors are required to provide housing. So we also will be sending out a template, which is a housing memorandum of understanding. And it just sort of says, like, these are the cleanliness standards, whether or not visitors are allowed, and if so, for how long. Because again, like if somebody has a visitor come and you thought they were staying for 3 days and they actually stay for 3 weeks and you're paying the utility bill, that might actually be a big hit that you weren't expecting. So you might want to think about, like, is there a threshold with a visitor staying in the employee housing with your apprentice? Are utilities covered or not? Are there bedding and things like that? Are you asking for a pet deposit if you're allowing them to bring a pet? You can ask for a pet deposit if you need that. The housing, though, is part of their compensation. So I don't think many mentors have asked for a pet deposit. So an MOU isn't legally binding, but it is, again, just a way for you to be able, as a landlord, to say, these are the standards by which I want you to take care of this housing that I'm providing for you. And then some ranches and farms actually have some sort of an employee manual. I will send out a template on that as well with these notes. And that's a place where you can go into more detail about policies. And I'll talk a little bit more about policies in a second. A few other things that you're going to want to think about and when you're getting ready to hire is because your apprentice is an employee, if you're with the New Agrarian Program, you do have to have workers' compensation insurance, and that's based on the full compensation package. So that would be wages, housing, if you have a food stipend, if you have an equipment stipend, you actually create a dollar amount. And again, if somebody has questions about that, I'm happy to talk to you outside of this call about that process. You aren't required to do a medical intake or an emergency contact form. I recommend it, and we do it at our ranch because we're more than an hour's drive from any kind of a hospital. And that's technically wilderness in the wilderness medicine world. I was a wilderness educator for a number of years prior to coming to the ranch. And it can be really useful to at least have an emergency contact and a copy of the employee's insurance card. So if they are injured and unable to really communicate who should be contacted and the fact that they do have emergency and you're driving them to the ER, it's good to at least have that information. I will send out the medical intake form that we use on our ranch. It basically asks, are there any, like, do they have allergies? Are they on any medications? Case in point, there are some medications that people easily dehydrate if they're taking, and they may not know that. And so in the summer months, if they're taking a medication that does that, they might need to take extra water to make sure that they stay amply hydrated. And if you know that, then you've done some due diligence about making sure you're creating a safe workplace. So they don't need to disclose medical information to you. That is private, and they certainly can't do that during, the interviewing and accepting the job. We can't ask for medical information. But once they're hired, if you feel that that would be useful for you, like I like to know if they have their appendix or not, because I want to know if they're having that kind of pain, whether I need to rush them someplace. I had an emergency appendectomy. I don't recommend it. So those are the kinds of things that you may decide you want to at least ask your employee to fill that out. In the February call, we'll talk about the skills sheet that we ask our mentors to create, and then they meet with their apprentice 3 times in the season in order to review that. You can kind of think of that like your syllabus. It's all of the skills and duties that you plan to introduce your apprentice to, not that they're going to become masters in all of those, but what's sort of the full spectrum of learning that you're trying to offer. I will send out a sample skill sheet with the notes from this call, and the February call will really drill more deeply into your skills sheet. But I do recommend that you create that before your apprentice arrives, because your apprentice, one of the things you need to do in the first 10 days is a baseline skills assessment with your apprentice. So you want to have that skills sheet ready before they arrive. And then if you do have a ranch manual, you obviously want to have that ready beforehand. Let me see. Any questions about all of that? One thing that I didn't historically do, but I've started in the last few years, is actually, once the apprentice has accepted the job, I set up either a Zoom or a phone call for about an hour prior to their arrival, where I just sort of have an opportunity for them to ask any additional questions. We talk about what kind of gear they should bring, what kind of clothing, insulated boots. Do they have any questions about the housing or about ranch policies? Just, once they're out of that interview stage, they may realize that they have some questions they've never asked, and giving them the opportunity to have that phone call and maybe even fill out their employment documents prior to arriving. That way you don't have to do it once they're there. You can kind of jump right into getting them oriented to your ranch or farm. But it also can help make sure that if there are any last minute kind of confusions or clarifications needed, you've taken care of those. So some of the things that they need to know before they arrive. Again, consider doing a phone or a video meeting. I don't know how many of you have ever seen this YouTube video of this Scottish sports broadcaster having a Zoom call with his dogs, but it's hysterical. If you're interested, I can send you the link. This is the place where you're going to probably want to make sure that you sort of reiterate your policies. Like, what is your policy about cell phone use during the day? You're going to specifically want to make sure that they understand what your firearms, visitor, or pet policies are. Can they bring a firearm? If so, what are your safety measures that you require them to do? Are they bringing a pet? Do they want to bring a significant other? Sometimes they won't tell you that they want to bring their partner or something. And then all of a sudden they kind of spring that on you. So again, that phone or video chat is an opportunity for you to clarify that the housing is just for the employee, not for anybody else. Or are you open to them having someone else? That's an opportunity to also talk about the gear list. Our mentors usually provide, a furnished housing. But, if you need them to bring their own bed linens or towels, or if you want to encourage them to bring things that will help them sort of feel homey, do they have a favorite coffee cup? A phone call or a video call in advance gives you a chance to let them know that they can bring those things. The NAP program does provide a gear list to apprentices. We'll give that to them in February. So if you have any thoughts about things you think should be on a gear list for any apprentice and you want to send those to me, I can make sure that those are included in that gear list that will go out to them all. What's their mailing address, their physical postal mailing address while they're with you? They more than likely will need to receive some mail. That way they can put through their change of address before they arrive. And then these last two, I think, are some that really are incredibly valuable to think about, which is they're going to be pretty disoriented when they arrive, unless they are local to your area. They are relocating. They're leaving all the people they know. They're leaving the places they know. They're probably coming to a place they've never been before, to people they don't know, and entering into not just a job, but sometimes a culture, a work culture, which is very different than where they have been. So they can be a little intimidated and a little disoriented, and anything you can do to kind of help them kind of get grounded in your philosophy and practices and the community is going to really help them get off to a good start. So if there are particular magazines or journals or websites that you read on a regular basis that are really important to you when it comes to ideas about how you manage your operation, you might want to send them a list or let them know, check out a couple of these things. Do you have a favorite podcast that you listen to, or maybe just a couple of key episodes of a podcast that you think will really help them understand your practices and the way you like to run your operation, why you do things the way you do, why they're going to be moving electric fence endlessly every day? Like, help them understand why they're going to be asked to do what they're doing. Once they arrive on site, they're going to be working pretty hard and they're not going to have a lot of energy sometimes for that kind of extracurricular learning. So if you can send them something a couple of weeks in advance, it's going to help them understand you. It's going to help them arrive with good questions. It's going to help them understand how they fit into your operation. And they'll probably make them more enjoyable to work with because they're going to be more curious. So any kind of resource like that, consider sending them some things in advance. You don't want to overwhelm them. But, if you're involved with the Savory Institute or Holistic Management International, if there are things there that you want to send them, I think that that can be really useful. And then if there's anything that's going to help them understand the area they're moving to, is there a local newspaper? Does it have an online option that they could, at least check the headlines? Let them know how far away they're going to be from a store. So, do they have to drive half an hour to get groceries? Do they have to drive 2 hours to get groceries? How far do they have to go on their day off if they wanted to try to do something recreational? So these are the kinds of things that you can cover, the readings, podcasts, getting to know the local area. You can wait to do that until they arrive. But if you have the energy to do it beforehand, I do recommend it. Again, they're going to feel pretty overwhelmed. You're going to want them to be jumping in and learning their job duties. So if they can do a little of this background work before they arrive, it's going to help you help them. So I'm not going to be exhaustive with this, but just as a reminder for those of you on the call who are part of the NAP program, so the bulk of what they're going to be doing for the next 8 months is with you, working hands-on, experientially, learning the tools of the trade as you teach them. But there are also program elements which NAP provides, which they are obligated to attend. And so we'll send this list out to mentors so you have all this information and can schedule that in. But just as a reminder, they do have an in-person orientation. They are required to attend that. So if they've already started working at your site before those dates, you will have to let them leave with ample time to drive to the orientation site and then return to your ranch. The dates for the Montana sites are March 26th. I think we're going to start kind of late afternoon and then end by midday on the 29th. We don't know for sure the location on that yet. We're still working that out. In Colorado, the dates are April 8th to 11th. And again, if you have any questions about that, you can reach out to your coordinator or me. And the dates on either side of those date windows are sort of half days, so that ideally includes travel time. You will have to do 3 skill sheets meetings at least in the course of the season. I find that the more time we can take with the skill sheet, the better for all involved. Again, in February, we'll talk more in depth about the skills sheet process. The NAP coordinator will be doing a regular monthly check-in with your apprentice. They will also want to do a regularly monthly check-in with you. Mentoring can be a big lift, particularly if you end up with a challenging season due to weather or illness in your animals or in your crops, things happening in your personal life. And we want you to feel like you have support. And just somebody, either whether it's to call and vent about the fact that it's been a hard couple of weeks, or to troubleshoot about something that you've tried all of the things you know how to do, and you're still having a communication issue with your apprentice. You know, your apprentice has seemed really tired lately. You're wondering how to handle bringing that up, but not prying. You know, that's part of our job, my job as well as your coordinators. So that's why we have those monthly check-ins. It's not so that we're policing you. It's really so you just don't feel like you're out there trying to run your operation and be a teacher all at the same time without any support. There will be at least one required workshop in the summer for both the Montana apprentices and the Colorado apprentices. That's usually a low-stress livestock handling clinic. We don't have exact dates for those yet, but we will have those soon. They do have a supplemental education call in the evening once a month. It will be the 4th Tuesday of the month this year. Those start at 6 o'clock. So you do have to make sure on those days that your apprentice is free early enough from work duties that they can get someplace where they have internet and be able to attend that supplemental education call. You know, optional field days, that's entirely due to whether your calendar can allow the apprentice to be gone to do something additional that's in your area. And then they are required to attend the Regenerate conference in November. That is graduation for them. And ideally, they are on payroll until that point. So again, I can talk in detail about any of those things with any of you, and you can also talk to your coordinators about it. These events are really important to the apprentice. One of the things they experience is a lot of sense of isolation, and having the opportunity to get to know each other and spend time together is hands down one of the things that they say really makes this program work for them. It's the quality of their relationship with you as a mentor, and the fact that they're meeting other young people who are eager to be doing this kind of work and having the opportunity to start to build their own network of colleagues. So it is really important that they're able to attend these things. Again, I'll go into this more in detail in February and March when we talk about how to balance work and education, but I just wanted to show these really quickly right now, because these can be things to think about in advance of ways that you can, again, kind of help your apprentice understand what they're getting into when they're coming to work for you. In particular, the calendar that's really easy to read, the one that's sort of typed that has the months across the top, March, April, May, June, July. If you can create something like this, which is just sort of what are the general duties, what are the general things that are happening on your ranch or farm each month, and actually sort of put that in writing and even send it to them in advance. This is incredibly helpful for them for a couple of reasons. One, it helps them realize that there are certain times of the season when certain duties are going to be the top #1 priority, which means that's what they're going to be learning. That's what they're going to be developing. And they're not asking you to work on plant identification in March. You know, like that may be a real desire and need for them, but if they can see on the calendar that, hey, we don't actually have green plants until June, so we're not going to do any plant ID until June. That way it helps them realize where they need to focus their energy, where they need to focus their learning, and that there will be opportunities for other kinds of skill development later in the season. So putting this in writing and giving it to them just kind of helps them get oriented to the way you run your operation, that there is a seasonal flow to agricultural operations, and that that's part of what they're going to be learning. The other two calendars here are just things we use on our operation. The very messy whiteboard one, which is impossible to read, is something that we have in our ranch office. And when we have our weekly team meeting, we sit in front of this calendar, and it's an opportunity for us to sort of download everything that is on George's or my brain as the owners and the overall managers. But then as the apprentices become involved and have a little more autonomy and responsibility, it's a place for you to just sort of download what are the priorities for the week, who's doing what. And so this is a place where we put not only what is the duties and the things that are happening at the ranch, but also when are George or I available as mentors, and when do we have other obligations and we won't be available. So again, this just helps the apprentice be oriented. They can look at the calendar, you know, like during the weekly meeting, team meeting, they may have heard these are the top priorities, but they may not remember it all. But if they can then come into the ranch office or the farm office and look at the calendar and see, okay, well, today is Tuesday, and on Thursday we have to haul animals. I'm kind of at loose ends right now. Well, maybe I can go gas up the truck, check the tire pressure, make sure to get the truck and the trailer ready so that when we need to haul on Thursday morning, all of that's taken care of. So this kind of structure, this kind of organization will help your apprentice not end up twiddling their thumbs when they aren't entirely sure what to do. It helps them start to understand how complicated and full the work days are, and helps them figure out how can they be useful. And then just the thing at the bottom is that we also have a Google Calendar. We find that working with both the big visual calendar and the Google Calendar really works for us as a team. They may or may not work for you. Some people also use apps like Asana in order to organize job duties with their apprentice. So people just are oriented to what needs to be done. So again, we'll go into all this stuff in more detail in later meetings, but I wanted to show them to you now because you might want to think about what systems like this do you want to try to implement, because you may want to work on those before your apprentice arrives. And then lastly, I will send out 2 sample orientation or onboarding agendas. One is from our ranch and the other is from Round River Resource Management, also here in Colorado, just so you can see the 2 different ways that operations do this. I really recommend that you create an orientation schedule of some sort, and that you have it in writing and that you can share it with the apprentice or intern when they arrive. That again just really helps them kind of settle down, stay focused, not feel quite so overwhelmed by all of the things that are new. So there are a few things in our program that we ask mentors to do in those first 7 to 10 days, and which is why having some sort of a schedule, you know, thinking through for yourself, how can I be available to make sure these things happen? That can be useful for you. So in the first 7 to 10 days, if they haven't already signed their employment documents, you're going to want to make sure to get those done so you can get those to whoever is doing your payroll system, whether that's someone at your ranch or you have an outside bookkeeper. I recommend that you actually send these to them in advance, a W-4 and their contract, and have them sign them in advance, and then return them to you. Orientation to the physical place. I think it's really useful to have printed maps of various pastures or of your whole operation. They can get lost really easily, particularly if you have a large landscape and there aren't a lot of really easily identifiable landmarks. And if you have the time, actually go out and drive around like your whole operation, all the different pastures, or at least the ones that you're going to be using in the first, say, month to 6 weeks, the ones that are going to be really important, that they know where they are. So when you say, hey, I want you to go out to the Forbes pasture to the north fence and check it, because that's one that the elk run through and nobody's looked at that fence since last summer. We're going to be moving animals into that field next week, and we need to make sure that we do the fence repair. Like, they don't know what any of that language. You just spoke a foreign language to them, unless you've driven them around, unless they have maps. So do try to build in some time when they arrive to get them oriented to place, and that they have maps that they could take with them or that live in the glove compartment of whatever vehicle they're driving, so that if they do get lost, they can kind of help themselves. And ideally, like, they know where the water tanks are, where are the gates, are there irrigation ditches, what are the hazards that they need to watch out for? Are there places where the ground is particularly soft at certain times of the year and they're going to get stuck? You might want to like put big marks on the map about don't drive here. Those are the kinds of things that, again, may not even occur to us to do. You know that ground's soft there. You don't have to have it marked on a map, but they're not going to remember that you told them not to drive there. Do a driving assessment if you can. They may say they know how to drive a standard transmission. They may not. And they may not know how to drive a really kind of clunky, old, needs TLC ranch vehicle. They may be used to driving vehicles that are much newer and in better condition. So what we do is we figure out which vehicles they're going to be using most frequently, and we try to go out and drive with them in those vehicles in those first few weeks, and we just sort of check their driving. I've noticed sometimes people drive way too fast around headquarters, and they don't realize that the guard dogs may be hanging out or something. So do a driving assessment if you can. Use those calendars or something to give them a sense of what the first couple of weeks are going to look like. We're going to start lambing on this date usually. And, this is where I'm going to want you to be focusing your energy. Just kind of orient them a little bit to where you need them to be paying attention. You'll do your skills sheet baseline meeting in that first week or so. Ideally, it's really good to ask them what their longer term goals are. Maybe those came up in the interview. You could also ask about those if you do that pre-arrival Zoom or phone call, just sort of like when they think about where they want to be 3 years from now, or what kind of a job would they like to be able to apply for at the end of their time with you. There are a couple of reasons for that. One, if you know something about their larger goals, that will help you keep them motivated, because you can talk about the fact that, okay, so maybe they want to be a really great land manager, whether that's working with agencies or managing a large operation. Well, the fact that you're going to make them go out and really assess utilization every day when they're moving an electric fence is a skill they need to master. So understanding what their larger goals are can help help them understand why you're being so persnickety about them getting things right that might seem minor to them. And then ideally, do something fun with them. Again, remember, they're going to be confused, isolated, overwhelmed, have a shared meal, watch a movie together, do something, tell them what your goals are for the year. And do they have any questions about that? Try to spend a little social time with them. That investment up front is going to pay you a lot of dividends down the road. And then just lastly, think about what resources you have that you can make available to them. If you have books or journal articles or videos, that you would like them to have access to. Figure out where you want to put those things so that, if they do have time and energy for some self-study, you've shown them where those materials are, particularly if they're things that have been meaningful and central to your own understanding of why you do things the way you do them. Think about whether there are people in your community that might be a really interesting resource for them. Like for us, we have a great NRCS range ecologist. We also have a really remarkable soil scientist, agronomist, and we usually try to have our apprentice go spend at least a day just kind of job shadowing that person. For one thing, it helps them just kind of learn more stuff. For another, it gives us a break. It gives us a day where we don't have to be thinking about what to do with an apprentice, so we can get caught up on stuff that we may be behind on. And it also helps them just start to learn their community and how to build community in a rural place. And they probably don't know how to do that. So if there are people that might be interesting for them to meet, even if they're 20 or 30 years older than your apprentice, that doesn't matter. They're trying to learn how to build a professional network. And this is an opportunity for them. And then just think about most of us in agricultural operations grew up without a lot of praise. As George likes to say, the only time he ever got feedback was when he screwed up. To his dying day, I don't think his dad ever told him he did anything well. More than likely, that's not the most successful way to keep an employee motivated. So you might ask somebody you work with, ask your spouse, ask a past employee, like, what could you do to improve your feedback skills, and start to think about how you might do that. And we'll have a call on feedback in April too. So I know that was kind of a fire hose of information, and we are almost at time. I can stay on and answer any questions, but does anybody have any questions, input, anything you've done on your operation that's been really helpful?
I was just gonna add, Julie, I loved the farm or ranch kind of manual or handbook in like a vehicle. And in my experience, something that's like couple pages but laminated, so if you're out irrigating or if it's raining or if it's winding, it's not pages ripping out and flying out the window. Even like an emergency contact list, like Christy and I go out of town and the well stops working. Who's the well guy? And like, it's just like, oh, call Ken. Here's his phone number, water and well issues. Or we've got a huge breakout and you're here by yourself. Or call our neighbor Danny or call our neighbor Marcos, and either one would be no problem, would come in a heartbeat to come help you. Something like that can also be a great resource so they're not feeling overwhelmed in times of crisis.
I think that's
Yeah.
a great point. And there is a section in the sample employee manual with that emergency list. But I think even if that's the only thing that's in the vehicle is a laminated emergency contact list, I think that's thanks for bringing that up, because absolutely number one, and letting those people know that like introducing the apprentice to the neighbor in advance so they don't hesitate to call them. I think that's a really great point. Thanks, Fiona.
Totally.
Julie, I had a question. I loved your idea about asking for any like medical situation, like, do you have your appendix? Like, you guys have talked so much about not getting into an area where you're not. So how do you balance that?
Well, so you can't ask any of those questions before you have hired somebody, because they can't shape your decision to hire someone.
Okay.
And that's the distinction. Once they are hired,
Okay.
you can ask them to disclose anything that would be useful for you to know if we were in an emergency.
Perfect.
So
Okay.
that's the way that I frame it. And again, they can choose to not tell you,
Right.
which is why I think at least getting the emergency contact information is
Yep.
really critically important. And ideally, maybe two, like, if they have two parents, getting the cell phone number for both, or a significant other, just so if you can't reach one person, you can reach another.
Perfect.
Um, Usually if it's something like they have allergies or they had like those kinds of things, I haven't found people are resistant at all once they're hired. They've actually disclosed, oh, I have a bad knee and stuff like that. And then I know, okay, well, I need to make sure that I show them correctly how to handle something so that they don't re-injure that.
Okay. And then the only other thing I thought of, and I don't know if you mentioned it, is just cell service. Like we only have like 1 or 2 providers out here. So
Yeah, that's a good point. Thanks for bringing that up. Yes, I would say that definitely prior to their arrival, let them know. I know for us, just for work purposes, like we really ended up getting used to the fact that they can call us or at least text us most
yeah.
of the time. So yes, so definitely let them know what the preferred provider is. Depending on where they're coming from, that might mean a change in plan for them. So that's also something, I know some mentors actually provide a work cell phone because you don't want, it's not fair to ask somebody who's making so little to change their provider and perhaps be dinged with a penalty.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you for bringing that up, Amy. Anything from anybody else? Well, I know we're over time, so please feel free to get off. Like I said, I'll stay on in case anybody does have any questions, then you want to stay on. But thank you, everybody, and have a good day. Stay warm.
Thanks,
Julie.
Julie.
Uh-huh. Bye.